and gladly welcome you all to December's Makers Meetup. And as the community leader, you're today going to talk about Coda-AI and the tweaks you're putting on it. Super excited about this. And the stage is all yours. Please go ahead.
Okay, so I'm going to share my screen, but it's based on what we've been doing for the last while with our clients. Actually, it's over a year now, probably more than a year, that we've been trying to do this kind of thing. And a lot of the clients that I work with, the CIOs and the senior people who do all the AI, or not the AI, the automations and so on, are saying, we don't get it. And all this hype, where's the beef? We're spending a fortune on tokens and people are individually getting benefit from it. But in terms of our business and our bottom line and profits, we just don't see it. And there's a worry that it's not sustainable, that if these big tech companies are spending billions and not actually making profits, is it all going to be a bubble that'll burst? And I'm saying, no, 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 relax. Here's where the beef is, right? You have your no-code automations up and running, and you're automating everything, and you're getting huge financial benefits from that. You've all this artificial intelligence technology, and it's all getting better so fast, and it's brilliant. Most of it is stuff that isn't useful for automating businesses. But, so you have assistants and you have co-pilots and all this touchy-feely stuff. But in the middle here is the thing that's going to make a difference in 2025, and then that is agents. And that's where we're able to improve our automations by adding in just a little bit of intelligence in here. And I think this is where the billions, the billions of billions are going to come from an economic point of view. And it's certainly where I think people should be putting their skills. Because if you're one of the people who are able to do no-code automations of business processes and use agents to add AI to those, then I think there's going to be a big demand. And I certainly understand that that's why a big investment is being made by Coda in Coda Brain. And I'm hoping that Coda Brain is going to improve this, but not really change it very much from what I've been doing. So the question is, how do we build agents in Coda, and how do we stop them hallucinating? Because that's the big barrier that stops people from trusting what they're producing. And some of my clients are financial services, and it's got to be 100% right every time, or they just can't use it.
Yep.
And one of the examples that I'm going to give here, just briefly, just to set the stage, is here's a Coda automation that's being used by a company that produces these big, complicated water pumps for mines and for quarries and building sites. And the customer fills out an order form, which is quite a complicated piece of UI using Coda. It doesn't generate an order, it generates a requirement because the customer doesn't know enough to make sure that they've gotten all these different bits and pieces all put in properly. That requirement then goes to an engineer who uses another Coda app to configure what the customer is looking for. And this engineer is an expert and has access to a lot of technical specs, the supplier catalog for all the bits and pieces and the parts. And they've developed their own procedure manuals that explain exactly how to classify the different use cases that people have and build a solution. And from that, they build a bill of materials, which is basically a list of all the parts that need to be put together to make a solution for this customer. And when that's confirmed by the customer, now you have an order, and that goes to a dispatcher in a warehouse who runs a warehouse application, who then pulls out all the bits and pieces and sticks them on a truck and sends them off to the customer. And eventually the customer will get the delivery. There's a delivery docket that says, here's all your bits. They sign off the delivery, and eventually somebody in finance delivers an invoice. This is all bog standard, happy as you go code automation. Could be done in any other no-code tool as well. And what this customer doesn't want, or sorry, what this particular operation don't want, is to give their customer a chatbot that says, let me help you build one of these things. They don't want that. They are happy with the customer filling out the requirements form. And they don't want to give the engineer a co-pilot that says, let me help you. Let me look at what you're doing. Okay, I see what you're doing here. Let me, Instead, they want to surgically remove this piece of the process and replace it with an agent. so that this will just flow straight through as an automation. The engineer may have a supervisory role and take a check to make sure that nothing weird is going on, but basically you're looking to replace all of this with an agent. Now, the first time I was challenged with doing that, that was more than a year ago. LangChain was the way you did it. So I went into LangChain, learned how to do agents in LangChain, which is a Python-based development system. And so you use Python to do.
Interrupt you just a second. One thing that I thought was worth mentioning is in the slide you had before, because Max has told me about this before, and I just wanted to make sure that's not getting lost. This entire process, the stages are automated, but the task that relates to the engineer still relies on human judgment. So the
At this
company did
point,
not
it does.
automate that
Yeah.
part at
Yeah.
this point.
Yeah. They
And
automated it
that's
insofar as they gave a user interface and all the formulas and buttons and doodads are in there, but you still have to have this knowledge.
And that's what you now identified to say, okay, then now let's put AI to the task that has not yet been able to automate.
Yeah. 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 And it's an important point that we're not rebuilding everything from scratch because AI has suddenly popped up. We're saying, no, 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 we're just going to replace this one little piece of, and that means that we get all of our existing tables, all of our existing forms and workflows, all of our formulas, all of our actions, everything stays the same. We're just going to replace this one piece here with an agent. And as I said, the first agents we used were LangChain, and that's, you have to know Python. And so we had to upload all our documents into a knowledge corpus, and that means you're building a custom GPT that does this RAG, this, the whole thing of being able to use the LLM to understand the language of the instructions, but it answers its questions using this body of knowledge. So you build a huge, big, complicated prompt. And if any of you have been involved in building prompts, you quickly get into some very, very sophisticated language. Lawyers, Doug, do very well at this because they're used to writing language with precision and with consequence, right? The rest of us, we're struggling. And you end up with prompts that have more clauses in them saying, don't do this and don't do that. Because when you test it first, it works. And then every now and then it comes up with something, it puts quotation marks, or it says, I'm happy to help you with this. Say, no, 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 stop saying that, stop doing this, stop doing that. Now, it doesn't have any memory. These language models don't remember anything you're doing. So if it's more than one step, you need to build this object, this memory. So within LangChain, you build memory objects that remember things. You build these tools. And each tool is doing something that the LLM can't do. So this one says, here's how you go to the internet to do a search. This tool might say, here's how you use this API to get the latest data from this supplier. This one might say, here's how to use an API to update a database with the results. This is a complicated procedure that does all of the hydrostatic and hydrodynamic calculations that are needed to work it out, because the LLM can't do any of that. And then you get your output. And your output is normally a big, long, squidgy piece of text. And how do you get the input in? LangChain doesn't help you there. How do you put, what do you do with the output? LangChain doesn't help you with that. So you put all of this into a pack, and that's how you get at it from Coda. We got this working, and the customer wasn't happy. They said, we don't want our citizen developers, our makers, having to learn Python and JavaScript. They already know how to build relational tables and formulas. So why can't we do this in Coda? And after I'd gone around the houses here a few times, I started to notice the pattern. And I thought, this really does map to something Coda is good at doing. Right? And so we ended up being able to replicate all of this, but in Coda, and without doing anything fancy or extra. So you still have to upload your documents. If you're going to use documents in a knowledge base, you upload those into a vector database in OpenAI, and you get yourself a custom GPT. That's fairly standard. It's quite easy to do. Now we're using Coda-AI columns in a table to handle all of the AI stuff. And we're using Coda formulas to do the bits that the LLM can't do. So we have a formula for doing an API call, or you have a formula for doing your hydrostatic calculations. We have a formula that determines what to do next and which category things fit into and so on. We don't need memory because we've got everything in our Coda tables. Everything just sits in your Coda. Once you make this change, you suddenly think, oh, this is so much easier. We use our existing Coda UI dialogues and forms for the input, and the output goes to our usual Coda action formulas that say, upload this to this database, change this the way we normally do. So the whole thing becomes an AI agent written using nothing but AI formulas. And in fact, if you're not using a vector database, you can just use Coda-AI. You don't need to have a pack. But if you are using a vector database, then there's a little pack that you can use that does practically the same thing. Going to stop here for a moment and see if anybody's got lost in the dust. Or are you all keeping up with me?
No, it's good. It's
Yep.
great. Yeah.
Okay. So let's have a look at these agents that we've built.
Max,
Okay, sorry,
allow
go
me
ahead.
to ask a question, please.
Yep.
So where you say if we don't use an assistant, so if we don't use a pack if we don't upload our documents to, for example, an OpenAI assistant and then connect it via a pack to our Coda doc, is that in the future where we'd be querying Coda Brain directly?
That's where Coda Brain is presumably going to fit right in, is that we won't have to use a pack the Coda AI will be extended to be able to do that, right?
Understood. Wonderful.
So from here on in, I'm not going to use RAG. I'm only going to use Coda AI or OpenAI directly. The RAG thing gets complicated. I'll leave that for another day. So here's a classic example, a real one from an insurance broker where emails are coming in different languages. The email agent translates these into English if they're of the right language. We're only allowed to use certain languages for legal reasons. And then it passes them over to an instruction agent, which is another table. Every time a new record appears in here, a new row, the instruction agent looks inside the text and pulls out the instructions and creates a new instruction for each type. And then if the instruction is straightforward, it will write out the transaction to the transaction table. And this will eventually get sent up to a mainframe that implements all of the changes that the customers have asked for over here. However, some changes are not so clear and they get sent over to a special agent called a change agent, which then analyzes it and says, well, this is change of cover. This is a change of the type of the policy. This is a change of the value of the policy. And so it creates a different transaction based upon further analysis. And we're using AI because you can't write a formula that does this or this or this, right? It's beyond the ability to use a formula. So if I click on this button to run the agents, you'll see the agents running. The one that's running is highlighted. And so this one starts, it creates these, they run one after another. Every now and then you'll see the new transactions appearing over here. And every now and then one of the transactions is not simple and it goes to the change agent, which then figures out what type of change it is. And so you see the whole thing running here. And it, takes a few moments. None of this is blindingly fast. It will be in the future, especially when you start to be able to download the models into memory. So they'll sit inside your browser. And then when it's finished, all the transactions have been generated. And each one of these is just an ordinary table with AI prompts inside it. But we've orchestrated the whole thing so that it runs smoothly. And you'll see that only one agent is running at any one time. And that's because if you try and do too many AI things at once, the server will throttle you. It'll cut down, and it actually takes longer. It's much faster if you give it just one at a time. Okay. So this is what we've done. Okay, go ahead, Christian.
Yeah. So the change agents, that's Coda-AI, or is that a pack of this AI?
No, this is Coda-AI. There's no packs used in this. I'm just using good old Coda-AI for all of this.
Well,
right?
that's impressive.
Now, I will talk a little bit later about the differences between Coda-AI and using a pack. But for this type of stuff, ordinary Coda-AI is fine. Go ahead, Nina.
The instruction agent is the email agent hands off the task to the instruction agent. And the
Yes.
instruction agent on its own calls upon the change agent if it says, I can't figure this out, I need to bring in the change agent.
Yeah. So if we go down here, all of these are instructions that it understood. So it has classified them to say, I understand this. It's an instruction to create a new insurance policy. And so it goes over here and it says, here's the type is new, here's the number I want, and here's the amount, right? But every now and then it comes across something where somebody has said, please change the policy due to an increase in the value of my property. And it says, okay, I'm not sure what to do with that. I'll hand it to the change agent, which has different prompts and might actually be using RAG or something more sophisticated to do more work. And it then, so this ability to hand work over from one agent to another is part of how this works. And I'll show you now in a moment how that happens, right? I'm going to use a simpler demonstration when we come to looking at it. But what I'm trying to get at here is what we are now, we called it originally agentics, which is a bit of a mad word that we just made up, but now we're calling it precision AI because we have a better idea of what it is we're trying to do. We want AI to be deterministic, reliable, and accurate. And none of your squidgy, variable stuff where you put in a prompt and you really don't know you're going to get what you want out of it. Sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. And the way we do that is we want to use as much AI as is necessary, but only as little as possible. So if it can be done with a formula, then let's use a formula. Otherwise, and if you don't know what the formula is, you can ask AI to generate the formula, right? Nobody knows regex well enough to be able to just sit down and whack it all in. You ask AI to generate your regex to say change, for example, finding policy numbers where they could be this format or that format, and the hyphen could be here or it could be there, and you say, okay, give me a regex that does this, and AI will give you a regex formula and you stick it in. But you don't use AI for the stuff that it's bad at. It's bad at calculations, even simple counting, adding numbers, multiplying numbers. Use formulas for that. Don't ask AI to do that. Character manipulation is the same. It isn't able to. Procedural logic. It is possible to give a big, complicated prompt that has if, then, else's, and all the loops and branches in it, but every now and then it just gets lost. So instead, we use formulas with ifs and for eaches to handle that and only pass the small results over to the AI. Remembering things, we keep everything in our database tables. Complex prompts and complex outputs together are what cause hallucinations. When you end up with more than a few thousand tokens sloshing around in there, that's when it starts hallucination. So we find the way to stop hallucination is always ask for classifications. Here's 6 options, pick one of them that matches best. That doesn't give you as many hallucinations. Or if you're not going to use limited options, ask for formatted output. I want this as JSON, and the AI is much more likely to. But if every step with these small steps is so simple, you won't get hallucinations. Short, highly focused, very clear prompts with short, highly focused, straightforward, structured answers don't get hallucinated. It's only when you get into big, complicated stuff. So we break it down into simple steps. And for every one of those steps, we follow these 5. Use a formula to build the prompt and use your data from your tables inside the prompt. Hand it over to the AI, but make sure the prompt has a single purpose. So there's no complex logic. It's a small context and you won't get any hallucinations. Then you use a formula to parse the response, to break it down, to pull out the bits of data you want and to store those in your tables. We use action formulas overall to regulate or orchestrate how the whole thing works. And I'll show you that in a moment. And then we're asking for formatted output as often as we can because the AI does much better with formatted output. And we find it much easier to process the results if it's in a highly formatted output. So if I take a look at this, we have here, this is a simplified version of the agents we had before that are taking an input in different languages, figuring out what language it is. So here's the prompt, right? It says, what language is the text below written in? Respond with a single word. right? I'm not saying you are an expert in European languages from the 24th century or anything like that, right? The format we use is give the instruction first and then give the data, right? And if you're giving examples, give the instruction first, then give the examples, but put the data at the end, because this is a big, long, complicated body. Don't put it in the middle here, because you'll end up with several paragraphs in the middle of a prompt. It can be a bit confusing. And the same thing then when it comes to this one is saying, translate the text below from the language you've already figured out into English verbatim. Do not add any other text. Boom. And it just works, right? And I'm not using any packs. The ordinary AI will do it. And then the instructions, I'm saying, the message below contains several instructions. Please list those instructions one per line. And the text contains instructions spread over several sentences. So I'm trying to get AI to scrunch those multiple clauses and sentences together. So when I click this button, we'll see it running, and it just goes bump, 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 right? And when it creates the instructions, they appear over here. And then it starts going through. Now I'm doing something I said not to do. I'm actually using AI to find the amounts and the dates, and that's just to give us lots of AI to test here. Normally you'd use a formula for that. So the way we do this, and the reason I do it, if we look at the button here that runs it, it says, click the AI button on the inputs, and then click all the AI buttons on the output table. And so I'm saying, do this, do this, do this. And what does that do? It's saying, refresh the assistant, first the language, then the English, then the instructions. Because if I don't do it this way, AI, or Coda, tries to run the AI simultaneously across them all, which means it sometimes tries to translate without first of all knowing what the language is. Sometimes it tries to come up with the instructions when it hasn't even finished translating. And that's where you get weird things happening. So it sometimes says, you know, the text contains no instructions, and that's because it hasn't yet been translated. So by forcing it to do it in the sequence I want, I get it in the sequence that makes sense. But also, when it tries to do all of them at once, it stalls. There's some sort of throttling that's happening at the other end. That means if you're trying to do more than one, it just says no, and it does them at random. And you'll see these things coming back in a random sequence. So I use an action formula to sequence the whole thing, and I use action formulas within each one of these to sequence what happens on each row. Now there's a bug, and I want to just briefly show you what the bug is. When you're running the refresh assistant, you can't say this row. I don't know why, but it doesn't work. You have to say the name of the table and then the column, and then it'll work. It's weird. But anyway, so this is how we figured out eventually how to do agents using nothing other than standard Coda. However, when you use standard Coda-AI, mostly it uses GPT 3.5. Sometimes it uses GPT-4. And there's a big difference in the capability and in particular in the size of the context window. So there are times when we want to use GPT-4. Right? So here I have a ChatGPT-4. And if I edit the formula, you'll see I'm using a prompt pack. And I'm saying I want to use GPT-4. I'm using this row prompt, and I want the size of the context window to be 16K, and it will go off and do it. And if you read this prompt, this is what we call a big hairy prompt. It's written in English, and it is attempting to give you all the logic, but it's done as prose, and it's saying you're an expert in this, and here's how we want things classified. But here's the thing, I'm trying to get to the bit of logic in here. If it's a comedy, only list the characters of the play. If it's a tragedy, list the characters who die, and if it's historic, list the titles of the acts. and then lots more stuff. So when I run it with GPT-4, it understands all of this complexity and it gives me the YAML that I've asked for. YAML is a kind of JSON, but it's more reader friendly, human friendly. And it says, here's the plays, the title, it's a comedy, here's the characters. This is a tragedy. You asked for the deaths, here's the deaths, and so on. So when you go down, and you'll see that I use this as a test because it is a very long context. There are so many plays, right? What I'm trying to get to is a different way of writing the prompt. So let me go to where we have a different way of writing the prompt. And this is where we say, you have a task, it's broken into requirements, constraints, instructions, and output. And the instructions are list is a list of all the plays by William Shakespeare. It's like that's a variable. And then I say for each play in the list, so list is a variable, now play is a variable, classify play according to these. If the classification is this, then list the main characters. If the classification is tragedy, then the ones that die. And if the classification is history, list the acts of the play. Otherwise, respond with unknown type. Now, the Coda-AI, because it's using 3.5, gets itself confused. It tries to do this, God love it, but it ends up getting stuck down here and it just comes back saying unknown type. Whereas when I use GPT-4, as you see, I get, if it's a tragedy, here's the people who died. If it's a comedy, here's the main characters. And if it's a history play, here's the acts. And I get exactly what I want by using a much more structured input. Generally speaking, I prefer to use shorter prompts, but if you are going to give something complicated, I find this format to be much better. And we call it SAIL, which is the structured AI language. It's just our own terminology for this little trick. There is a way of getting Coda to always use GPT-4, and that's to put an AI block on a page. That's changed only in the last week. It always uses GPT-4. So if you want to use GPT-4 without using a pack, make it a block on a page, and then it will use GPT-4 every single time, and you'll get exactly what you're looking for. So
How
this
did
is
you
these.
find this out?
Oh, I don't know. You try lots of different things. We were trying. Okay, some of my makers were confused by building tables, and I said, okay, well, let's put it in a page. Let's make your agent on a page, and we started putting things on a page, and they found that much easier. And that's when I discovered, oh, look, this is always coming back in GPT-4. One last thing, somebody was asking, how do I pass entire tables over? Again, there's a table. It's a perfectly normal Coda table. And this prompt is simply saying, display the table below as YAML, and there's the name of the table. I'm referring directly to this table, and it will generate the YAML, which is, you could say JSON or whatever, and that means you can parse this. You can pass it to a pack, you can pass it to an AI prompt or whatever, but just somebody was asking, is there a way to pass over entire tables? And the people in Coda were saying, oh, no, you can't. Yeah, well, actually you can. You can ask AI to do that. And whenever this changes, this will change as well. And I think this is the trick they're using for Coda Brain. Anyway.
Max, can you elaborate on that trick which you believe is used for Coda Brain?
Yeah, so Coda Brain is, I think, primarily looking at your tables, right? And passing those tables over with some prompts to the AI model and saying, so you ask a question like, what were my sales, analyze my sales for the last 3 quarters, and it will pass over your sales table and a prompt. And the way it passes over the sales table is to break it down, probably into JSON or into YAML. YAML uses less tokens, so it's more efficient. It also reads better, but JSON is just as precise. Or you can hand it over as markup. My point is that Coda Brain is all about looking at tables and using AI to make sense of them. Now, it's also all about using packs to get the tables in, but it's not actually doing anything different. It's just using the packs that already exist. And once the data is in your Coda document, they're using some trick to pass those tables over to the prompt. And this is how I do it. And I just have a suspicion that there's not so many ways of doing it. If we change the prompt from YAML to JSON, then it comes up with something we're all probably more familiar with. It takes a while because I made the table too big. But you see that it's got the curly brackets and the square brackets and the quotation marks and the colons, and it's just very verbose. Whereas YAML is every bit as structured and as accurate as JSON, but it's more succinct and it's easier for humans to read. Okay.
Yeah, you had a question. Go ahead, Doug.
Max, you just hit on something that Christian and I were talking about the other day, which is the Coda brain gets stuff out of the tables and does something with it. But in their demo, they do a thing where they go into, I guess it's Salesforce, and they get a bunch of numbers, which I assume are already in Coda. But then they want to know something like who is the sales manager for that client or something. So then that's presumably not already in Coda, or are the packs all running around loading up Coda tables all the time, and the Coda tables that Coda Brain is using become these monstrous huge things.
Yeah.
Sort of
So I
intrigued by
think
when is stuff in Coda and when isn't.
Yeah. So I think the other thing they're doing is they have a tool that converts your English query or your natural language query into SQL.
Yes, context. Yes.
Yeah. And I think that's what they're doing there, because yes, you can't always have your entire, I mean, particularly if it's a big organization, and asking a question like who is the account manager for the customer who has had the biggest sales in December of last year ends up being a piece of SQL.
Yes.
And then you send that thing. But they didn't demo it I'm sorry, but they haven't really given us a good demo where I can figure any of this out. Hopefully this will change in January when we see what the man himself, who's actually in charge of building all of this, tells us. Because we've now seen 3 demos and I haven't been blown away by them. I still prepared to believe there's something amazing coming down the pipe, but I haven't seen it yet.
I must say that what you've done is incredible and may hold us in good stead for quite a long time while they roll out this creature.
I think it'll even be useful even afterwards. I think there are still situations where you don't want to go into something as intergalactic as Coda Brain. You just want to automate some steps one after another.
I love
Yeah,
this.
I also appreciate your hallucinations point. I once asked Coda AI for how to do something with a formula, and it came back with this incredible command and documentation and examples of how to use it. So I tried using it, and Coda said, well, yeah, but that formula doesn't actually exist.
Yeah, there's no question that, and the only way to stay away from, because hallucinations are baked into the very mechanism that's used, so they never go away. The only way to avoid them is to have instructions that are so short, simple, and clear and RAG helps. Also, you're saying, listen, only get the answer out of these documents. Don't go anywhere else. But I think Coda makes a very, very good tool for doing this work, far better than anything I've seen coming out of OpenAI or Google or any of the others, because it already gives you what you need to build an automated workflow without the AI, and then you just put in that little bit of AI that's needed to make it magic. Any other questions?
No, just to say that I'm very impressed, like Douglas, with the precision of the output.
Yeah. If you take it step by step and make it simple and don't ask it to do, I mean, there's this famous one where you ask each of the models how many R's in strawberry, and all the big foundational models get it wrong because they just weren't built to do arithmetic or text manipulation or logic or anything like that. All they know is how to make language, how to make plausible sentences using language. They are getting better, particularly when it comes to generating code. And I am working on a Coda formula assistant. I've given up waiting for Coda to come up with this themselves. So I'm uploading all the information I can find about the Coda formula language to an assistant. And hopefully I'll get to the point where it'll always give me proper Coda code in return, because it's heartbreaking to see what you can do with Replit and other tools like that, where you can say, oh, give me a routine or give me some code that generates a web page that does this and, inputs this and then outputs that, and it generates the code. And yet when it comes to Coda, which should be much simpler, we don't yet have a tool that can do that.
My understanding is, Max, that with Coda Brain, the intention of Coda is that most users won't touch any code anymore, because the brain will solve. No, I'm rather serious. So
I understand you're serious. I'm skeptical, right?
yes.
There's an old saying that has come through the media somewhere, where somebody said, "Oh, this is programmers. We're all going to be replaced with AI." And then somebody said, "Yes, as long as the users can express very precisely and very clearly exactly what they want, then AI will do it." And then they all go, "Oh, you're right. Okay, well, we're all safe, so, because none of the users we deal with could ever do that."
No, I agree, but I believe that is the internal drive why they are focused so heavily on Coda Brain, to avoid the many frustrations people have today when trying to make something. Anyway, back to your work. It's really impressive. Yeah.
What I haven't shown you is that it extends the work I've done before with the object-oriented matrix table. So there is a tool behind this where you can extend. Some of you were part of the beta testing of that. So I'm trying to also, but to be honest, it's really a skill and a knowledge and just something you just have to become good at doing. I don't think I can automate it much more than I have. Sorry, Nina.
What I love is I love all of this, but on the slide you were on earlier, so the page you went to before this one, where you passed the entire table to the Coda prompt, to the AI prompt. I think what is so obvious from seeing that, so you see the table, and then you know that all of the content of the table is passed on as YAML, and boom, it's so obvious. How can you restrict your data set? How can you essentially create a data frame to pass on to AI? All that you need is very basic Coda formula language to say, go to this table, filter it down by this criteria, then pass it to the AI. And that's something that I have not seen with that ease in any of the other tools. Because like you said, if you were to use Replit, you still need to know how do you query and manipulate the database that it's using. And that's not that easy to figure out. Whereas here you have all the data you see, you can visualize the filtered table that you're retrieving and then pass it to the AI. So I think this is really special what you've come up with, especially how you visualize it.
Yeah, and I think what Christian's point earlier is that eventually I think we will reach the point where formulas and code will seem very old-fashioned, and we'll be all remembering them the way we remembered CD-ROMs with little holes in the middle of them and things like that. It'll be something that we all knew in the past, but we're not there yet. And I have worries. If you have users who are asking AI to generate the code to do something, and then simply taking it and using it without any regard for whether it contains any problems or not. I think the art of coming up with test cases, of doing test-based development, is probably going to become very important, because if you can't see the code, or if you look at the code and you can't understand it, then by gumbo, you better have good test cases. I've seen so many places where people put in a prompt and it worked. And they said, oh, okay. And then they tried another piece of data and the prompt worked. And they go, this is great. Let's stick it out into production, And then 10 attempts in, and it suddenly starts going wrong because the test data was ridiculously small. I think the art of testing. Now, you can ask one of the things that Coda-AI is great at is giving me test tables. I can say, give me 20 examples of customer orders, and it just goes and generates the table for you.
Yeah, but the expectations of the average user will be that the AI will respond to something like, give me the total sales of my blah blah client on that period. And then, everything you said about the AI is not good at today is a basic expectation of the end user. So yeah,
it's a worry, but they're working on it, as everybody keeps saying, this is the worst it'll ever be. It's going to keep getting better. Anyway, Nina, I do want to leave us with some of the meeting left to have other topics of discussion. So I'm done, if there's no more questions.
You're done. I have another question for you on your structured AI language that you showcased, which I also found very interesting. And I would like to know which kind of testing or which particular aspect revealed to you that this would be a good way to structure it? Did you try, because you're proficient in so many programming languages, this seems to be VBA based, but how did you come up with how you want
It's
to
actually
structure this?
YAML. It's nothing else but YAML.
Okay.
Right? Because YAML is used. YAML stands for yet another markup language. And it came out of the Python world where they tried to simplify everything. And I just asked GPT-4 one day, is it possible to input a prompt in YAML as a way of making it nice and structured? And it said, oh, yes, and here's an example. And within a matter of minutes, I was looking at this going, nobody's mentioned this to me before, but maybe it's just the way my brain works, but I find this much easier to follow and to understand. If I come back to this in 6 months' time, I can figure out what it does and I can make the necessary changes to the logic. I can hand this over to other people and have a fair idea that they'll be able to figure out what it does. And if they need to change it in a safe way. So I discovered it by asking GPT, my good old friend GPT-4. I said, Tommy, can you do it with YAML? And it said, oh, better bippy, I can. Here, look at this.
And have you noticed differences in using it with the structured language versus the big hairy prompt you tried earlier?
Yes, it does seem to maintain its position in the logic much better, right? The problem is GPT 3.5 doesn't understand YAML. It wasn't trained on YAML. There was no focus on that. So you have to use GPT-4 or one of the more modern models. But yes, it keeps its position. It doesn't lose the plot. And then the human is able to keep their position as they read it, and they don't lose the plot either. So it just seems to work better than what I call the big hairy prompt.
You mentioned earlier that you could get it to go to GPT-4 by having an AI question on your page.
Yeah, that's what's here.
Is that AI question asking a GPT-4 question? Or are you requesting?
No, it's not saying anything about GPT-4, but what I'm saying is that if you put a prompt into a column in a table, it tends to use 3.5. If you put a prompt onto a canvas AI block, it tends to use GPT-4. Right? Okay. And that's only in the last week. Last week, when I did this, it didn't work. This week, suddenly it started working. I think as a side effect of the work they're doing on Coda Brain, they're fixing some of the problems. So I fully expect, if we go to this one here, I fully expect, because this right now is just standard Coda-AI. And as I said, it tends to use 3.5. Every now and then it uses GPT-4. I don't know why it changes its mind. They have some sort of an A/B testing going on. But I suspect, because of the work they're doing for Coda Brain, this will change. I'll come in tomorrow morning and run this, and it'll be using GPT-4. And then I'll be going, yay, I don't need to use my pack anymore.
Blessing just posted a question in the chat. Blessing, do you want to go unmute and ask?
Sure, yeah, I'm following along. So this is really insightful because again, when they launched AI, I hit the token limit pretty quickly. And that's when I was making my own little brain and GPT plugin. And I said, ooh, let me just opt out. And so I haven't used Coda AI extensively, but I'm working on an AI workshop, and Coda keeps coming back to the best place to give people a tactical way to just test it quickly, right? And get used to using it. So this is very timely for me. My questions are we sure that Coda is using 4 and not 4.0?
Oh, it's using 4.0.
Okay, okay,
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, I
okay.
use 4 as an abbreviation. Let me show you exactly which one it is using. I think I have it down here. No, okay. Oh, I do. Yep, yep. Okay, sorry if I. So the model I'm using, because I'm using my own pack, and there is a pack that's free. It is the Open AI pack built by Coda, which has the
Right.
prompt in there. I'm using GPT 4.0 from 2024 on the 6th of the 8th month, right? So I'm being very specific because this one has the very large context window, right? If you want a
Okay.
really big context window in the megabytes, then you use Gemini, and there is a pack for that. So if you use Gemini, you can ask for a context window of up to 1 megabyte.
Okay. Now that makes
10
full sense.
megabytes eventually. I don't know if the pack allows you to do that, but you can certainly get megabytes of context, which is terribly important because Coda just loses the plot once anything goes outside the context window, and it doesn't tell you. There's, it doesn't come back and say, "Oh, I've gone bonkers here because it overflowed my context window." It doesn't tell
Well,
you.
that's a limitation in GPT land too, in Chat
Mhm.
GPT, right?
Yeah,
It doesn't really
yeah,
tell you
yeah,
that it's
yeah,
lost context. It just
yeah,
starts
yeah.
making things
I
up.
usually have an if statement whenever I'm dealing with emails. I usually have an if statement that counts the number of words in the email. And if it's more than a few thousand, like 5,000 or 6,000, then I'll generate an error message because I have little faith in its ability to handle messages that go beyond a certain size.
No, that's really insightful. And the other thing is that I know in a number of AI apps, because everything goes into, the prompt in the AI ultimately, some people have tried specifying parameters at the top of a prompt using the syntax I put in chat. And so if you were to put model equals or temperature equals, I wonder if that would change the output.
I tried that. Because most of my clients are in the Microsoft world and they know
Okay.
Visual Basic very well. So if they could put their prompts in Visual Basic, they would be very happy. I tried
Hmm.
that. It doesn't quite understand it. Now, if you put them in Python or JavaScript and ask it to execute that, they are getting good at that. But the closest I've come to it is this statement here where I'm saying list is, and it has a colon, all the plays by William Shakespeare. And then for each play in the list. So I'm using list and play as variable names. By putting them in capital letters and referring to them precisely later on, the LLM gets it. It understands, you're being very precise here. You're referring to these things in a way as if they're variables. Now I know what you're doing. But if I say count is equal to count plus 1, and then further on I say now it's count is equal to count multiplied by 10, it won't follow that. It might or it might not. It'll be very peculiar. So that's where you pull that out, make it a formula, because large language models are no good at assigning values to variables and then referring to them later. Make those
Yeah.
variables part of your Coda tables and then insert them in the middle of your Coda prompts or your AI prompts in the right place, and you achieve the same result, only now you're using proper formulas to do your arithmetic, and you know they're always going to give you the right answer.
Yeah.
Do I remember correctly, Max, that you had created your own pack where you specified the model and also set the temperature of the model?
Yes. And this is not happening here because Coda AI doesn't set the temperature. But if we go to this one, I think, yes. So when I'm calling this, the next parameter after here is the temperature, but it defaults to 1. So when you call the prompt formula from the pack, you can set the size of the context window, and then the next parameter is the temperature. But if you go to the details, we'll see that the temperature, it's still got the GPT-3 terminology. They haven't updated their, but I'm actually using GPT-4. But it must be between 0 and 1, and it defaults to 1. And 1 is where you're getting no creativity. You're getting absolute precise. It will always pick the most popular, the most probable token for the next token. So you get the minimum of creativity and, you know, squidginess, as I call it. It'll always, and therefore it is much more deterministic if you set the temperature to 1. But the default here is that it is 1.
I want to thank you so much, Max. The feedback I have is the same one I always have with you. You guide us through the content from the beginning to the end. We arrive at the end, and the feeling is, well, of course that's how it's supposed to be done. That's the most obvious thing in the world, except I wouldn't have reached it without you. So thank you so much for so generously sharing your expertise, your insights, and your entire train of thought with us. It's very much appreciated. Max, thank you so much. Thank you so much, and everyone have a good night. Good rest of
Good
the
night,
day.
everyone. Thanks for your attention.
Good
All the
night.
best. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.